That's about the best I can do on the piano, much to my mother's chagrin. Mother loved to play the piano. It was a part of the rhythm of her life. She wanted me to learn to play the piano and came up with a routine when I was in the fourth grade that when I came home 2 days a week, we would sit down at the piano and she'd try to give me lessons. Didn't work. Partly because it didn't fit the rhythm of my life. Coming home from school, the last thing I wanted to do was learn something else, and I wanted some downtime, just time to myself. But she tried and finally gave up. I wish I had learned. I would love to have learned to play the piano. Who knows? I could have been a great musician today. There's a lesson in this I'll come back to in just a moment. This is an unusual day, isn't it? Mother's Day, first time in my life we've not been assembled together with Christians, and the joy of everybody coming together and seeing some of those mothers on the pew with their kids, or even the older moms with their kids and grandkids. It's a special day, and it still can be. And we're going to try to make it that this morning. It's also unusual because of the context that we're in. First, this is my first Mother's Day to not have my mother with us, as she passed away about 9 months ago. But it's also the first time you're at home and have been at home for several months now. It's a different day. Typically, children had 10 weeks for summer vacation, and that looks like it's going to become at least 6 months at home rather than 10 weeks. That changes things, especially for young moms. So while I appreciate our efforts to honor the first responders and medical professionals, I think it's great. Today, I think we really need to honor the mothers who are at home and are now suddenly finding themselves having to do homeschooling. There's a lot more cleaning they have to do, a lot more cooking. Apparently from the grocery stores, there's a lot more toilet paper being used. It's not easy, I don't think, to make that quick of an adjustment. But suppose it had been intentional. Suppose that we had, by prayer, by some unusual circumstance, arranged to have our kids home with us for 6 months. You know, this may be very likely one of the only times in your life that as a mother and father, you're going to have your kids right there with you day in and day out. What a wonderful opportunity to share your faith with them. Well, I want to honor the mothers, all mothers. Today, I would like to focus on those mothers who are at home, raising their kids, often doing some other work as well, in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic. I hope the lesson today will encourage you and maybe even provide some spiritual guidance. But I hope it also will affect all of us as we are all seeking to be servants of God. The text I've selected that I think would be helpful is from 2 Timothy chapter 1. I'll begin reading in verse 3. Paul says, I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers, night and day. Night and day reference is sort of reflecting his Jewish worldview. The day began at sundown, at sunset. That was the beginning of the new day. So night and day would be the equivalent for us. As we structure it, we kind of look at morning, noon, and night. Basically saying, all the time I'm doing this. I'm not sure whether it was the consistent 3 times a day that the Jews would pray, but I read from this that it's far more frequent than that. And then he says, he makes reference to his ancestors, which is going to be a really interesting context here. Because as Paul gets ready to honor the faith of Timothy's mother and grandmother, he says, you and I have a lot in common with our spiritual heritage. Both of our mothers and grandmothers were godly women. Now, Timothy had a little bit of an advantage in the sense that his mother was actually a believer. And he goes on and says, verse 4, as I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. Some think this is one of the more personal, tender letters of Paul, possibly written closer to his death, probably written even after Titus, even though it comes before Titus in sort of a more natural sequence here as the scriptures came together. But it's clear he had a very personal, special relationship with Timothy, and he's giving credit to this to some godly mother and grandmother. Verse 5, I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the faith of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And then he goes on and gives you several options on what this gift is. It could be the sincere faith. It could be the gospel. It could be the relationship he has with Jesus Christ. It could be the fact that, as he says here in verse 13, the faith and love that is in Christ. I think it's probably all of those things. It's an incredible gift that he's sort of unpacking for Timothy. But what he did appreciate was the sincere faith that he observed because he knew Timothy's mother. And it's a pretty incredible story, because if you go back to Acts 16, you'll find that as right after the Jerusalem Council, Barnabas and Paul split company, partly over a disagreement about whether John Mark should go. Paul takes Silas, Barnabas takes John Mark, and then we find Paul apparently now by himself coming into the area of Lystra and Derbe and Iconium. And in the way Luke records it, that there was a woman who was a believer who had a son named Timothy, who had a great reputation among the churches of Lystra and the believers in Lystra and Iconium. What a great tribute to someone's mother, and how proud she must have felt that her son was so respected among those churches, because Eunice didn't have it easy. Her husband was a Gentile. She was Jewish. Her mother was Jewish. But apparently the normal rhythms of the Jewish family were not a part of their family, and yet, or at least the routines were not, and yet she still managed to instill a sincere faith in Timothy. I take that from the fact that Timothy wasn't even circumcised. So those typical Jewish routines didn't happen in his life, but that didn't keep her from living the rhythm of a faithful Jewish mother, and now a believer in Jesus as the Messiah. A sincere faith, a faith that's not fake, a faith that's not connected to just going to the synagogue once a week. It's a faith that is infused in everything that she does. I've been blessed. I've been surrounded by these kind of women. My mother was a very faithful woman. She loved the Lord, read the scriptures, prayed regularly. My mother-in-law was an incredible, stable, faithful, godly woman. So I'm not surprised that, I would not be surprised that same thing can be said about my wife under the influence. She's a lot like her mother. And such a good mother. She prays every day for children and grandchildren, and she's loved to teach, and she loves her family. And now we're at a stage in life, it is a joy to watch our two daughters and her daughter-in-law raise kids. There is within them this bedrock faith in God, and they pray, and their children are growing up in faith. One of them told me this week that one of the good moments for her was when she wasn't able to go to a certain church event, and it kind of frustrated her. And a wise lady at church said, "Oh," because she had to be at home with kids, she said, "No, that's where you need to be. That is your mission. And you've been called of God to bless those kids. There's no need to make excuses for that." And then our daughter-in-law with three sweet girls right now, and you can tell every moment that we see her and every moment we're with them, she just thoroughly loves being a mother. And she loves the Lord, and she's surrounding them with God's love and care. That's the kind of sincere faith that apparently Paul picked up on in Timothy's background and in his life. What do we do with that today? Let me look at least an assumption. When I ask the question, and I think if I was a young mother now, I would ask, okay, how did Eunice do it? How did Timothy's mother instill that sincere faith in him? Given her Jewish background, given what Paul's saying here, I think we could say it's because she was who she was day in and day out. There was a rhythm to her life that brought God in on a regular basis. Even though she could not always observe the rituals and the routines of the Jewish community, she was still very much a believer in the one true God. And it showed up daily in what she said and what she did and how she lived. I've made reference to rhythm and routine. Rhythm of life is organic to life. It's like the heartbeat. It's something that's very natural to all of us. It's intrinsic to who we are. And if you read what Moses said to do with the law in Deuteronomy 6 and 7, he said, you take these commandments, you put them on your heart, and then he really encourages them to influence their children with those commandments. It wasn't a matter of just creating routines, but it was something that influenced them, had actual power in their life on a regular basis. A routine, those are the schedules. That's the getting up every morning and getting dressed and going to work, or getting up and getting the kids up and getting them off to school. Those are those typical routines of life. They're really external to who we are. And so much of the time we have to adapt the rhythms of our life to the routines of the world we live in. One of the things I think that COVID-19 pandemic has done for us has changed our routines. I've begun to recognize that my routines have controlled my life, probably out of sync with the rhythm of life. And I think we're happier, there's more joy in life when we live according to the rhythms of our life that match our context, our personality, our needs, the gifts God has given us, and not let the world totally control who we are. And maybe by reclaiming the rhythms of our families, we will actually be stronger families, not totally controlled and dominated by the routines of the world around us, whether it's school or work or sports or other things that have just sapped us of the energy and the life that God intended us to have. Going back to my piano playing, I really believe if Mother had invited me into her routine, I probably would have learned to play the piano. In other words, many a time I would come into the room and here's Mother playing the piano, beautiful piece. And if she were to stop and say, Everett, you want to come play this piece with me? And I learned some little bit of it, it would whet my appetite. It would make me want to play the whole keyboard. Or rather than creating a routine for me to learn it, she would try to teach it with the routine I was more comfortable with. Here's the way I would say it. I don't know how to play the piano today because I said no to the routine, not to the piano. It was the routine that kept me away from it, not learning to play the piano. Could that be true of faith? Are there kids who didn't accept the routine of religion they're often exposed to? It's not God they don't want to know. It's not faith they don't want to grow in. They just struggle with some of the routines. And it's never brought into the rhythm of life. They don't even see it in the rhythm of mother or dad. Rhythms of life, of faith, may have been what Paul is talking about here in the sincere faith that lived in Lois and Eunice and now in Timothy. A wonderful insight. I know we're familiar with the song 10,000 Reasons. I picked up on this rhythm in the phrase when it says, the sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. In other words, Lord, I just want to sing as part of the rhythm of my day. Whatever may come, at the end, I still want to be singing your praises. Maybe that's a hint into how we can become like Eunice and influence our son to have faith against some pretty tough odds. Well, what can we take from this? What is God's gift that can really help us? I think verse 7 is where I'd like to do the highlight or a takeaway for us, where he says, he's encouraged him to fan the flame of the gift. And he says, for God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. Now, maybe a good 3 points for a sermon, but look at how these come together. Fear dominates the rhythm of our lives. It throws things off, especially when we cannot maintain routines and we get stressed and things don't work right and we're afraid we're going to fail as a mother or as a father. And let's stop and think. Take a deep breath. God has given us these gifts. And if we live according to the spiritual rhythm of our life, we are going to have power. I would understand this to be influence. We're going to have this power in our lives. When I think of this contrast, I think of Mary in the Magnificat. In Luke chapter 1, she said, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked on the humble estate of his servant, Mary. For he who is mighty has done great things for me, and his mercy is with those who fear him. He has shown strength in his arm. He has filled the hungry with good things. When I read this, Mary had incredible power and influence, more than any king that ever ruled in Israel. But she saw herself as a humble servant of God and went with the spiritual rhythms of a life with the Messiah in her own family. And the things that she hid in her heart. And yet she, no doubt, taught him to obey and taught him a lot of the important things of the will of God and of the law. She had power. And mothers have power. As I think of these good mothers I'm surrounded by, I'm reminded of the phrase, what did mother say? Did you ask mother? It's like mother has tremendous influence. Or we think something's funny and mother doesn't laugh. We go, okay, what's wrong with this? She's got this sense of maybe justice, the sense of what's right and wrong. And on a regular basis, because she's the presence of God in our lives, she is reminding us and calling us as children to a higher life and to better behaviors. And she's also calling us to number 2, to love. It's a gift of God has loved her. And he's shown his love to her by giving her these children. And now it's mother that's teaching these children on behalf of God to love one another, to love their brothers, to love people who are different, and most of all, to love God. And then there's self-control. I'm sure this is one of the toughest of all of these challenges, that it's going to have to be a gift that you receive from God. It's not something you're going to do by works. It's something that comes from God. Acapella has a song I like. You probably know it as well, Open My Heart. I think it's a song that captures these takeaways that Paul has for those mothers at home with children right now. Because if there is self-control, if this gift of God is influencing your life, it's going to impact your heart, your eyes, and your ears every day. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty with the song, but maybe it'd be something that will be on your heart this week as you seek to be God's presence in the life of the children God has gifted you with. Open my heart to what you know, so I can stretch, so I can grow. My feelings toss me to and fro. Open my heart to what you know about my kids that I need to teach them today. What you know about what my children need and that I can provide for them. What you know about how I can protect and guide my own kids. Open my eyes to what you see, to understand what I should be. My feelings get the best of me. Open my eyes to what you see as the potential in every one of my children. Help me treat them special, knowing that they're not all alike. Help me see what you see, and don't let my feelings get the best of me. Open my ears to what you hear, so I can keep you very near. My feelings may get so unclear. Open my ears to what you hear. It's a prayer. Maybe that prayer will be on your lips this week. Again, it's not only the moms that need it, the dads need that prayer as well. Before we conclude, I need the kids to help me. So if the children are still in the room, I want you to listen, because I want you to help me as we finish the lesson today. In fact, they're not in the room. Go call them in real quick. Here's what I'd like to ask the children to do. Join me in saying, "We love you, Mom," at the count of 3. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. We love you, Mom. And now I want you to show Mom how much you love her. May God bless you as you seek to be God's presence in the lives of your own children this week.